If there's 3 things I love in my video games, 1 would be parrying, a means of stopping an enemy's attack to strike back. 2, lots of interactivity with the enemies. I want several methods of actively participating in battles, not just a boring trade of blows. And 3rd are grappling hooks. That one should be obvious. Grappling hooks are just the shit. So when I caught wind of Garde, an indie action game that focuses on parrying and massive amounts of environmental interactivity, I had to check it out. There is no grappling hook, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But Garde is being sold at $20. Does that mean it's not up at the same quality as $40 indie games? Or is it what I think, and it's just the devs giving you a really good deal? Some people have a problem there. It's like the length of the game is a sticking point, which I don't think that's the case, but we're going to figure this all out throughout this video. So let's get started. This is Garde. In this Spanish-European town lives Adalia de Valador, a brilliant fencer and hero to the poor and the weak. She constantly finds herself busy thanks to the greedy actions of the Count Duke, a man who does something for the town but also hatches several plots and conspiracies that only benefit him. There are 4 episodes in Garde, and each will see you working toward a different goal. Episode 1 sees Adalia chasing down this masked fencer named El Vigilante. He puts her through several trials, which serve as the game's tutorial. El Vigilante is defeated and is definitely not Adalia's brother Alejandro. Episode 2 begins with the heroine in jail, easily breaking out and having a climactic showdown with the Count Duke because he started a big fire. That's reason enough, I guess. Episode 3 is about Adalia teaming up with Zaida, another female fencer who's a bit of an anti-hero. The two are attempting to steal back the keys to the city from the Count Duke, but they have some playful banter and a clash of blades before making up. They lay on the gay subtext pretty thick with these two. Hell, I don't know if you could even call it subtext. They clearly have a thing for each other. It is cute and mostly serves to give us another boss fight. But episode 4 takes us out of the city and puts the cast on a remote island, making it my favorite level in terms of aesthetics. Adalia has tracked the Count Duke to this island to uncover his conspiracies and the conspiracies of those conspiracies that conspire against those conspiracies.
Is everyone in this island involved in their own evil conspiracy?
It's all played for laughs, but this brings us face to face with El Vigilante and Zaida for one final showdown with each before foiling the Count Duke's plans once and for all. I think it's plain to see, but there's a reason these missions are called episodes. They give off the vibes of a Saturday morning cartoon. I mean, the whole game does, but these bite-sized chunks of narrative is what I'm mainly pointing at here. There isn't really an overarching narrative. Instead, at the end of each episode, the day is saved and it's back to the status quo, perfectly setting up for the next episode. Characters aren't very deep, even if relationships are clearly defined, and it doesn't feel like it has a desire to take them any further. So if an engrossing narrative is something that you need to enjoy games, you might be disappointed here. But for me, I think this is perfectly fine.
Luckily, in tight spots like this, I always manage to find a conveniently hidden exit.
Oh no! She found the conveniently hidden exit! Again!
The story isn't what caught my eye initially though. I was looking forward to slashing and parrying and dodging my way through these cartoony brawls. And thankfully, Garde delivers on that. Adalia is actually a pretty simple character as far as they go. She has a basic 4-hit combo on square, a parry on triangle, a short dodge by pressing circle once, and a dodge roll by double tapping. A jump on X, she can sprint away from enemies by holding down L2, and holding L1 brings up a list of special attacks. By fighting enemies and doing cool stuff, you gain panache. You can spend your panache on a piercing strike with square, a circular swipe that knocks surrounding enemies on their back on triangle, and a super kick that can knock enemies way back on circle. She's no Dante or Doom guy if that's what you were expecting. This is a Souls-like, so this makes sense, but the complexity comes from the environment and the interactions Adalia can have with the different parts of it. The real kickers, no pun intended, of Adalia's moveset are the interact button on R1 and the kick on R2. This game and its enemies are packed with so many different states and status conditions that they can be placed into, altering what they do or how they fight by so much it's absurd. R1 mostly just grabs and throws certain items. There are a few occasions where chandeliers will be hung and you can drop them on unsuspecting enemies, or a swinging cage can be unleashed, knocking it into anyone who runs by. But more often than not, it's the variety of these throwable items that are worth discussing. You have basic items like vases and loots that simply bonk the enemies and knock them back a step, but large pots will cover the enemy's head and leave them unable to block attacks. Roasted turkeys also do the same thing, but with a much more comedic visual touch if you ask me. There are bags of dust or glitter, not exactly sure what it is, but they'll spawn a cloud of this stuff, stopping any enemy close by for a short while. Bombs can be found and thrown at the enemy, but they won't do anything on their own. They have to be thrown into a fire source like braziers to explode and daze nearby enemies, which then brings us to lanterns. On their own, they'll set an enemy's tushy on fire, but if you throw a lantern onto an environmental object like TNT crates or cannons, huge explosions will happen, blowing every enemy around them away in a huge blast, making lanterns my favorite of the bunch. But each of these items have their own purposes, obviously, becoming even more effective when paired with Adalia's kick move. This kick does exactly what you think it would do. It sends an enemy backwards. But like we've seen, the environment is jam-packed with things for these enemies to stumble into. First are barrels and crates. These things might look useless, but they can topple enemies quickly, especially if there's a stack of them. These guys never stood a chance. Next are stairs. If a goon is stunned next to an incline and Adalia kicks them, they'll go for a nice tumble. And this is even better if you have a group of them coming up the steps. Tables can hold all kinds of items for Adalia to use, but you can also use the table itself. Kicking the table won't do a whole lot on its own, but if an enemy is on top of it and it gets kicked, they'll trip and fall. If kicked into walls, enemies will splat against them. It doesn't do a whole lot, but it does take them a minute to get back up. But if there happens to be a weapon rack on that wall, it's an instant loss of a hit point. Same for these pillars with vases on them. There are explosive barrels that will start to detonate when kicked. Didn't know Adalia's boots were match heads, but I can roll with it. Speaking of rolling though, these are under the mercy of the game's physics engine, like the crates and regular barrels, meaning they have to bounce and roll for a moment before exploding, so watch out. Enemies can be kicked into braziers and they'll set their ass on fire, but if braziers are kicked, they spark the surrounding area. This can be a means to ignite trails of gunpowder, which lead to cannons. Basically another means to use cannons if you don't have a lantern on hand. And lastly, don't underestimate kicking enemies into other enemies. They can be great tools for spreading the hurt and isolating some of the more threatening goons. We'll take a look at the enemy types themselves, but first I think we need to go over the states each enemy can find themselves in. Enemy health behaves very similarly to Sekiro. The white meter is the enemy's guard bar and will deplete as they take damage, but the red dots above the bar represent the hits the enemy can take. So I guess it would be more accurate to say that's the amount of health bars the enemy has, similar to something like Kingdom Hearts. Either way, the objective is to dodge, parry, and slash those bars away, but some enemies will block attacks and be impossible to slash. This is where the fatigue bar comes in. This orange meter will fill when you wear the enemy out. Kicking them into walls, downstairs, crates into them, these things will fatigue them, and when the bar is filled, they can always be kicked and will take increased damage. To kick or hit most enemies, they have to be caught off guard. You can do this by dodging or parrying their attacks, but kicking objects at them, throwing cups or loots, or even jumping at them from high up will surprise them, giving you the opportunity to kick them and build up fatigue. Some goons will have other requirements though and take different tactics to beat, so let's go over them. Lackeys are the basic enemy type and will swing at you, but they never block attacks, so a 4-hit combo is always enough to take them out. The soldier is the next rung up. He's the first enemy you meet with 2 hit points as well. He has some red unblockable attacks too, but he can simply be parried and dodged down. Elite soldiers are a different story though. These guys introduce the special guard bar. This yellow meter has to have your sole attention. You'll have to parry and dodge their attacks back to back without interruption, or else it will instantly refill. This is taken to the extreme when facing more than one elite soldier, because these enemies are designed to have each other's back. They will constantly swap in and out with each other, moving your focus from one to the other. The optimal strategy is to fatigue and stun as many as you can to eventually single them out for one-on-one duels. Captains are by far my least favorite enemy type though. The first hit point isn't difficult to get, she just has to be surprised since she has this shield to block attacks. But she then becomes Smau's second phase from Dark Souls 1, dropping the shield and gaining a crazy boost to her speed and defense. She's next to impossible to fight in a group since her surprise windows are so short you'll only get an attack or two off before you have to go back to dodging. This is the enemy I always save big TNT crates or cannons for. It's just easier to attack her after she's been blown away or has something on her head. Oh, that or I put her in a wheelchair. Grenadiers will stay away from the fight and toss bombs onto the battlefield. These ladies usually aren't much of a hindrance. The bombs supply me with explosions that, yeah, don't really damage the enemies I'm fighting, but they do disrupt them, and that can be enough of an opportunity for me to fatigue or stun a more dangerous enemy. Even still, Grenadiers aren't difficult to take out if I need to. A lantern can be used to light the bombs they carry and then blow them up, which would be way more violent in any other game, I just realized. But if that's not an option, they just take 2 slashes to beat. They might make a fart cloud to stop the first slash, but they aren't too slippery. The final enemy type is the Duelist. These guys are the toughest basic enemy to 1v1. They aren't stunned as easily as others, meaning you really have to use explosions or something bigger to open them up for attacks. But after they are opened up, they aren't too bad to parry and dodge down. There are also 3 bosses that you'll be facing off against, so why don't we cover them quickly as well. Firstly, you'll fight El Vigilante. He's got 4 hit points and is the least intimidating boss you fight. He's not bad, seeing as how he'll start blocking most of your attacks after his 2nd hit point, and you have to get creative to fatigue him after that. But overall, he's probably the easiest to deal with. Next is the Count Duke. Think of this guy as a captain, but he has 4 hit points. So yeah, not fun. The same issues apply here for me. The dodge windows are too small, and after the 2nd hit point, he becomes too fast and aggressive to focus on anyone else. I always let explosions help me out on this guy. Finally, we have Zyda. She's tough, but she also has the coolest moveset. She shares a lot of similarities with the Duelist for her basic attacks, but she also has some unique moves. She'll smoke bomb away and then dash back in, which you have to dodge, and I thought that was pretty neat. But again, these bosses aren't terribly complicated. Pretty much all of the enemies are built from a similar framework. They all have attacks that need to be parried or dodged. You're not going to have to memorize 3 or 4 attack patterns to win these fights. It's these enemies and environmental interactions that really make for a unique sandbox. And I don't think I've ever played an action game where the environment is used so liberally to take down enemies. The only thing that comes to mind is the environmental takedowns in X-Men Origins Wolverine, but those were more so another instant win button to go along with your collection, not indispensable tools that make or break your success in battles. On Guard makes it very clear, you have to use the environment to survive, and it's true. These enemies will chase you down and gang up on you so fast that playing this like Sekiro or some other Souls game will get you killed so fast. At first I thought this game was a little bullshit because I was trying to fight enemies in a group and they were throwing out attacks that required 2 different actions at the same time. I was like, hey, wait. That's not fair. You can't tell me to perform one action and then another at the same exact time. Those elite soldiers were terrible at doing that, and they weren't the only ones. Even with the parry and dodge windows being as generous as they are, having groups of enemies on you at the same time is a death sentence. But that's when I started to realize, I'm playing this game how I want to play it, not how they want me to play it. So I started experimenting with the environment a lot more, using monkey bars and other traversal elements to get the drop on goons, taking advantage of every single environmental hazard I could find and isolating enemies away from their comrades every chance I could, and wouldn't you know, it got me results. This is how you're meant to play the game. There might be something to say about how ineffective the swordplay alone is most of the time, but I also don't think that's a sound criticism. The game very clearly leans on its interactivity as a central pillar of the experience. Playing the game like that interactivity is second fiddle to a basic parry and dodge mechanic starts to put the environment's significance into perspective, and that perspective is it's not nearly as fun. Of course, I played all 4 episodes on the hard difficulty and it was perfect for me. I think the easier difficulties lower enemy aggression and increase the amount of hit points Adalia has, but even then you can turn on invincibility mode in the options to just enjoy the wacky fun the game has to offer if it seems overwhelming. For a game with so many deep systems to sink your teeth into, it's very family friendly, with sound effects and writing that wouldn't be out of place in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. If anything, I would say this might be a good place to let a younger audience experience a Souls-like, as weird as that is to say. I know that's a weird quality, but it is a quality. Even with its colorful and slapstick exterior, it's still, like I said, a mechanically rich game. One that I enjoyed besting time and time again. I overcame all of the arena challenges, which were a lot of fun. They give you waves of enemies on these remixed arenas from the campaign episodes. But on top of that, they have these randomized conditions you have to battle with for each wave. You get to choose a positive condition, like boxes do way more fatigue damage than usual, or you regain a hit point after every thrown object, but you have to take on a negative condition as well, like lackeys now only use unblockable attacks, or captain's hits will stun you more, making them extra terrifying. Each one ends with a boss fight from the different campaigns, except the fourth one, which is a 1-on-3 with all of the bosses. It was tough, but I had perks that were keeping me alive, so I made it through. Other than that though, there's plenty of exploration to be done in these levels. This team is great at building fun levels to run through and explore. The platforming won't be giving Mario or Assassin's Creed a run for their money anytime soon, but I did appreciate these playgrounds that I can run around in between the playgrounds I fight in. There are these notes and points of interest to find in levels that can be pretty entertaining to read. I got a chuckle out of a few, especially the one about the Count Duke's advisor being a little too happy to grovel at his feet. No judgment, but yeah. There are also secrets to find for those extra curious players. I only managed to find 1 or 2 throughout my playthrough, but each episode is supposed to have a few of these. I guess I know what to do next time I feel the urge to come back through this game. Along with trying to nab all of the achievements that push players to do things like finish each episode in under 30 minutes or collect all of the points of interest, I think this game is more than worth $20. That's a fantastic deal. The main campaign took me about 5 hours to get through while I was combing through the levels to find as many secrets as I could, then tack on another 2 hours for the combat arenas, and I got 7 hours of amazing action right there. And I only have half of the achievements right now. I could easily put another 3 or 4 hours into this game to get 100%. The combat sandbox is obviously the highlight of the game though. I was constantly blown away by the amount of states that the enemies can be put into. The details in these enemies and the animations and how they work with each other makes each encounter feel unique to the last. There were a few small hiccups that seemed a bit unfair, things like enemies' hands flashing a color but not actually following through with that type of attack, or for that to happen and then they follow through with the opposite type of attack, or small instances like an enemy hitting me as he was falling off of a ledge with a bucket on his head. Okay. Speckles of weirdness popped up throughout my playthrough, but that didn't stop this from being an amazing game that I can't recommend you add to your library enough. Congratulations to Fireplace Games on this amazing experience. Consider me a new fan of the studio, and I can't wait to see what you all come up with next. I will see you all next time with a look at one of VR's most beautiful titles, Hubris. And after that, I have another VR game, surprise, surprise, that has an anniversary coming up, so I need to get back in there and see what all has been fixed because the original launch was a little rocky. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.